never know what Teams is feeling like doing on a day-to-day basis. So, all right, so I will go ahead and get started real quick, just some housekeeping things. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Grassi, and I'm the Outreach Manager for COMIT. Thank you so much for joining us today for our October webinar. And I hope to see you all again as we continue our series next year. Hard to believe I'm saying that. And we'll continue to focus on a large range of topics related to COMIT's research goals, such as technological advances in seafloor mapping, operational advances, applications of hydrography, safe navigation, women in STEM, DEI, and beyond. So please continue to stay engaged with us via our webpage, newsletters, and social media, which I'm going to go ahead and link in the chat now. As I said, we'll pick up again in January of 2022. And so now I'll hand it over to our director, Dr. Steve Morawski, to introduce our distinguished speaker for today, Dr. Brandon Jones. And so, as I mentioned in some of the emails, the presentation is going to be a little on the shorter side, so we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion, which you're welcome to either use the raise your hand feature or the chat. So, Steve?
Yep, thank you, Sarah. And we're really happy to have Dr. Brandon Jones be our speaker today in the last of our 2021 webinars. So Dr. Jones is the Program Director for Education and Broadening Participation in efforts at the NSF's Directorate of Geosciences. And of course, as everybody knows, geosciences funds pretty much all of marine science related to academic programs in the United States. At NSF, he oversees programs that really focus on undergraduate and graduate workforce for the geosciences and supports initiatives related to increasing diversity and enhancing inclusion in STEM disciplines. Dr. Jones has a BA in biology from Lincoln University in Philly, which is an HBCU, and he has his MS and PhD degrees in marine biology and biochemistry from University of Delaware's College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment. He was a high school teacher before he started his MS and PhD work. He's a board member of the AGU and a current member of their environmental leadership program. He's also a member of the Dean's Advisory Council. Of course, we have one of those at USF as well for the University of Delaware's College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment. So, Dr. Jones, we very much welcome you and take it away.
All right, thank you, Steve, for the introduction, and Sarah for the invitation. And I'm going to try to start the sharing. So Sarah or someone, if you could let me know if you see what you should be seeing. Let me see here.
Yep, so I think we just got to switch again, switch the presenter and the...
Got it.
All right, perfect.
That's good? Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. And of course, Teams, I think, closes my video, so I'll be able to turn that back on after I stop the screen sharing. But anyway, so again, thanks for the invitation. I'm going to try to move through the slide deck quickly, so we'll have plenty of time for discussion, and hopefully the slides and the information I'm presenting will spark some discussion and some thought, and so we can move more into having more conversations about this issue around what we call at NSF Be a Jedi, but also further into implementation, and not just continuing the conversations, but more about what can we do to make our research enterprise more inclusive for all to be involved. So here's the title: Diversifying the Geosciences. Science does not conduct itself, so who is conducting? And let's just get started here. We'll start with, you recognize this gentleman on the right, Charles Darwin. Not that Darwin's my favorite person or person to put forward regarding issues of inclusion and diversity, etc., given the patriarchy that he was involved with. But in our cancel culture, we have to learn how to recognize there are flaws in people, and they do make mistakes, but also recognize that they have provided some serious seeds of theory and thought for us to move forward on. And in this context, we have this quote here from Darwin that says, a moral being, and again, this is from Charles Darwin's The Descent of Man, and I have you see there the chapter and the pages. So he mentions a moral being is one who is capable of reflecting on his past actions and their motives, of approving of some and disapproving of others. And the fact that, we'll say, humans are the beings who certainly deserve this designation is the greatest of all distinctions between humans and lower animals. So this idea of humans being able to recognize what was going on, what has happened in the past, and learn from that is one of the things that distinguishes humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. And we have to be prepared to grapple with our history when we're talking about what we need to do to move forward, certainly in the sciences, in this space of inclusion. And so these are the three take-home messages. If you don't recall or remember anything from the talk, please, maybe commit these to memory, or at least use these as discussion points. Number one, the STEM workforce, it can't operate at full capacity if all available qualified minds are not engaged. Okay, so for instance, if we're just talking about binary gender, if it's only men involved, then you have removed 50%, probably over 50% of the brain capacity, just generally speaking, for problem solving and observation and conducting science, etc. So how can you expect to have fully holistic, complete, thorough research that is conducted, including interpretation and drawn conclusions and implementation and everything, if everyone's not there? And in this that example with binary gender. Number 2 and 3, individuals who are in the workforce cannot operate at full capacity if they are stressed. That's ecological theories of organisms having optimal zones where in their physical world or in their environmental world where they can operate best, and individuals have that, humans have that as well. So we want to make sure that we are creating environments for individuals. It doesn't matter if it's an undergraduate or early career faculty or the new dean or whomever, where they can operate to their full capacity. And number 3, we have to get this, the time for talking is just, it's probably 15 years past that. We have to change the way we're doing things in order to speed up the scale of approaches that are needed to address all of these issues, most certainly climate change, that are impacting our planet now. And so you synthesize those 3 points down to this: individuals are not able to bring all of themselves to the research enterprise, and that hinders not only their development, but it also hinders the enterprise, because now the enterprise is not receiving all of the different ideations or brainstorming or observations or ways of knowing that could make things better and that could bring us to solutions quicker, and implementation ideas or approaches afterwards. So as I mentioned, we at NSF and certain programs within directors, but certainly in the Directorate for Geosciences, we refer to these broadening participation efforts with this acronym Be a Jedi, which connects pretty well to science types. I know there's been some recent kind of pushback from other sectors about, I'll call it the gimmickiness of maybe using Be a Jedi, but you have to know your audience, and that's part of code switching and understanding how you communicate concepts and ideas so that everyone can grasp them and move on to bigger and better things. So this is one that seems to be resonating with most of the community in the Earth and space system sciences. I'll call it that instead of geosciences. And there's the breakdown of the acronym for each letter. I don't have to go through each of those. So this acronym is what many of the programs that I manage center around. There certainly is the research portion that we still have to support because we're the National Science Foundation. That's never going to go away. Innovative research, discovery research, basic research, that's the foundation. Has to be there, going to be there, not going anywhere. But NSF also has another criterion, which is broader impacts, which for 20+ years now, most of the community and many of the disciplines, not just in the Earth Space System Sciences, is still grappling with, what does that actually mean? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as I move through the slides, and hopefully I'll give some ideas for us to think about. When we're talking about Biajadai, all of those elements there, belonging, accessibility, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, what we're talking about is the allowance and the valuation of different perspectives, and not just hearing the perspectives, but intentionally integrating the perspectives into problem solving. And so it's not just, okay, we check the box for having this type of person at, in the discussion or maybe in the planning group, but did you listen? Did you hear? Did you intentionally grasp their lived experience, their culture, their observation of the same, let's say, natural phenomena? And are we intentional about integrating their observation and their way of knowing and their cultural perspective into the design of a research plan and carrying that plan out? When we're talking about Earth Space System Sciences, we have several spheres here in the natural realm: cryosphere, atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, lithosphere. These are certainly the areas that the Director for Geosciences at NSF supports research. So we have polar programs, we have atmospheric and geospace, we have the earth sciences, and that's everything from seismology to geodesy to hydrology and geology, petrology, etc. And of course, as Steve mentioned, we have the ocean sciences. That's everything except, we say, marine biology. We have biological ocean, phys-ocean, marine geology and geophysics, and chemosh, et cetera, et cetera. But the anthrosphere is something that natural and physical scientists have been trained not to study or not to consider in their studies. But it's to be objective in science, you cannot not recognize the impacts that humans have had and are still having on the natural and physical world. And even when we are conducting science and conducting experience and collecting samples, et cetera, the impact that we're having on our actual, science expeditions, whatever you want to, however that's defined. And so we do have experts in the social sciences, I'll get to that in a minute, that we need to start to collaborate with more when it comes to this issue of broadening participation and allowing more perspectives into our natural and physical science disciplines. Now, one of the issues related to perspectives, in particular in the United States, and this is where things get sticky and a little bit uncomfortable, we have to push through that though, is that there's a notion that is taught to students from the time they're in kindergarten in the United States. The manifest destiny, and it's kind of glossed over, and the pilgrims came here, and everyone's came through Ellis Island once that was established, but we're immigrants. And this picture that you see on the left is from the famous Broadway musical Hamilton, and there's a song in there where there's a line in the song that say, "Immigrants, we get the job done." And so there's this notion that the United States is the great American melting pot, and people can come over here, and if you just work hard and you just do a good job and you get your education and things of that nature, you can move forward. For whom? Maybe for the immigrants it has been that way, but Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, so that's Native American, Indigenous, those who were kidnapped from Africa and brought over here during the slave trade, and Hispanic and mainly for the United States, I'm talking about Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans and other groups, they were never immigrants. None of them were. So indigenous peoples were already here. Latina, or we'll say Puerto Rican and Mexican are already here. The Taíno people already on the islands. And of course, the Africans who were kidnapped and brought here and enslaved, none of these people came as immigrants. Either they were here or they were brought here forcibly. And so the notion of you're an immigrant and you get to come in and you have the same access to everything, and if you just work hard and move through the system, you'll be successful. That is not the case, because everyone is not an immigrant, and the descendants of these people were not immigrants. They've been involuntarily, as Ruth Zambrana says in her book, Toxic Ivory Towers, involuntarily incorporated into the United States. And it just so happens in the Earth system sciences, it's these groups of people, along really, we could say over the last 50 years, that we've had issues with retaining in earth science and space disciplines. Okay, so this is from a paper, some of you may know about this, from 2018, Bernard and Cooperdock. This figure here shows the number of PhDs by race and ethnicity. And this is from NSF data over the last 40 years. And you see the black line are white, non-Hispanic individuals. And as the trend, certainly from the turn of the last millennium, from 2000, the trend is moving up, and it's still moving up. But all these other racial and ethnic groups have remained flat as far as the number of PhDs. Now, and everyone asked me what happened with the little blip here in the mid to late 90s. I'm not sure, but the point is, we don't want to miss is that for every other racial and ethnic group, as far as PhDs, it's been flat. Now, the funny thing is, on the front end of the pipeline with REUs and undergraduate programs, we have pumped in a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of time to bring in, recruit individuals. But the data clearly shows, and there's data from the American Geosciences Institute, as well as other scholarship, that as individuals move, certainly in the academic sector, move along and up through the structures of from undergrad to graduate degrees, they just start to drop off, they leave. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And again, as I mentioned, this says 40 years, but if we look back even 50 years ago, in 1972, there was a meeting. And here's the report from the first National Conference on Minority Participation in Earth Science and Mineral Engineering. And it was co-sponsored by the Department of the Interior and the Colorado School of Mines. Okay. So here we are 50 years later, still having these discussions about the retention of people and scholars of color in the Earth system sciences. So, we're talking half a century of work here. And according to Bernard and Cooperdock, we haven't made any progress. There's an issue here. There's an issue. One of those issues is around culture and our assumptions about who gets to conduct research in the Earth system sciences. So there's an assumption about who does that, especially in the United States. This book called The Loudest Duck is, as you see, moving beyond diversity while embracing differences. And the author in The Loudest Duck draws a comparison between this notion that you see here that is taught, again, to students, even in direct and indirect ways in the K through 12 system, certainly in college, certainly in grad school, that you must speak up for yourself. You need to be assertive. You need to stand up for yourself. You need to raise your hand, participate, do these things. And if I was in person, I would say, I would pause and say, okay, everyone fill in the blank. the squeaky wheel gets the what? The squeaky wheel gets the grease or the oil or what have you. That's that United States American way. But in China, there is an analog story that children are taught from the time they enter into school and move up, that the loudest duck, which is their squeaky wheel, gets shot. So if we're teaching, you must speak up for yourself, and other cultures are saying, no, you must respect your elders and be quiet and listen, then when we want to collaborate internationally, or not even internationally, but domestically with other cultures, and we're bringing our cultural lens, and the expectation is you must fit into my cultural lens, when it really has nothing to do with science. It's just the way that you see science. You know, we might miss each other, or we're trying to force people to be something they're not. Then we wonder, why are they struggling? Why didn't they stay? We need to find some tutors for them. We need to do, not that those things aren't true, but there may also be some issues with how we're relating to people because of the assumptions and biases that we're bringing. We also have assumptions about where geoscience research is conducted. This is particularly an issue in the Earth systems, or the Earth sciences, solid Earth, because traditionally there's been this, hey, let's go out somewhere else to collect samples, collect them, bring them back, analyze, do whatever we need to do with them. And in this paper from the Public Land and Resources Law Review, that's a heavy title to grapple with. And I suggest you all, it's free to download. You could Google this title and find the paper, The Ethnic Cleansing in America's Creation of National Parks. And for instance, John Muir is held up as, you know, kind of the grandfather of conservation and working with President Theodore Roosevelt to set up the national park system, et cetera. But that wasn't the original concept. The original concept did include all the millions and millions and millions of indigenous peoples that lived in those areas prior to the national park system being set up. But the idea that won out is John Muir's idea of an uninhabited wilderness. You know, that just doesn't make sense, but that's what won out. And the creation of the national park system came about, and geologists to this day take their classes, their undergrad classes, maybe from schools in the East all the way out west to like you can't do geology in Eastern Pennsylvania or Arkansas. You have to go all the way to Utah to do that. So why are we perpetuating the quote Western expansion model just to collect data, and oftentimes on lands that are indigenous lands or sacred to other people, without that recognition, without collaborating with that community, without reaching out to the tribal elders, without those care principles it would take to conduct science in an ethical way? So those are things we have to realize about assumptions of who gets to do science and where science gets to be conducted. And if we don't grapple with those assumptions and get them right, we can end up creating programs or activities, or in my case, writing solicitations with false assumptions, and those get embedded and integrated in the programs or the solicitations or the activities, and the results can be quite scary or disastrous, and feed into this loss of retention for certain groups. So for instance, if we have an REU, or you may have a summer program now there at USF, and we build it and we communicate it and we market it as we're going to recruit these students. It's going to be the best summer experience they've ever had. Just come work in my lab, come work in this program, or we'll recruit you, we'll pay you a stipend to do this. And the opportunity is presented.
It's going in and out. It's really unstable. I get a couple of words.
I'm sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yep, sorry about that. Someone was just unmuted for a second. You're good. But you're now muted, Dr. Jones.
How's that?
Good. Yep,
Okay.
sorry about that.
That's all right. So we market our opportunities to look like what's on the screen, but then the individuals that participate, some, not all, obviously, some individuals that participate in these opportunities have this type of experience. And this is more than an anecdote. Again, their scholarship, there have been surveys, there have been evaluation instruments designed that have shown that time and time and time again, individuals from different groups, could be gender related or orientation or race or ethnicity, individuals with disabilities, etc., didn't have the experience that was marketed to them, even though they were interested in science. So if we have all of the scholarship showing that there's an issue with that, and all of this, the anecdotal evidence and all the testimonies, we have to wonder about our US Western notion of grit and stick-to-itiveness and merit, and do they have what it takes, and maybe they don't fit, and all of the language that we use. And if it was just every now and then one fish that we saw that didn't make it, we could say that fish didn't have what it took. But if over 50 years, it's fish after fish after fish after fish after fish, then we have to decide, well, when are we going to look at the water quality? When are we going to figure out, or to switch our efforts? Not that we don't still recruit, but what's going on with the environment? Since we're marine science folks, and I'm a larval ecologist by training, recruitment can happen in the estuary for all types of organisms coming in. But if the bay is hypoxic, what difference does it make? They're not, and larvae, in the case of many crustacean larvae, they pick up cues from adults. They pick up their settlement cues from the adults that are in the habitat. So if the adults aren't there, or there's stress chemicals coming from them, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the larvae move on. And we could kind of extrapolate that to what's going on, perhaps, just philosophically discussing this, perhaps what's going on in some of our disciplines, why students don't stay, why early career faculty don't stay, why women don't stay, why students or postdocs of color don't want to come, or are struggling. Are we going to continue to focus on the individuals, or are we also, as scientists, will we also look at other factors so we can get a more holistic picture, like the environment that these individuals are being recruited into? Okay, so now we're talking about changing the culture of science, not changing the scientific method, but changing how science is conducted, whose perspective is always winning out, or is always the one that is elevated or centered. And so culture change, as the quote says, isn't simply a business initiative, it's a social initiative. We can substitute business for science there. And because it's a social initiative, we need to have our colleagues from the social and behavioral sciences part of this discussion. I've heard many times in the last maybe 3 years, as these discussions about broadening participation have ramped up, certainly after last year's social unrest really had just taken off. I've heard from scientists internal to NSF, other agencies, as well as out in the community, why won't NSF just tell us what they want for broader impacts? And my response to that is, does NSF tell you what we want regarding intellectual merit? No, we don't. We don't tell chemical oceanographers how to do their science. So we're not going to tell you how to address the broader impacts part of your proposal. If you're a chemical oceanographer and you want to know how certain pollutants are impacting larvae, but you're not a larval ecologist, then you go partner. You go to the next ASLO meeting or the next partners meeting, and or the surf meeting or something, and you meet up with individuals. You go to their poster session, their talk. You collaborate with them. You go out to happy hour, talk, and say, hey, let's work together. That's what you do on the science side. But for some reason, natural and physical scientists have a bias about social and behavioral sciences not being real science. So we have to get over that hump in our training and our own minds if we're really intentional about broadening participation. And I will say that the federal agencies, certainly NSF, is becoming more and more intentional about what goes into the broader impact sections of proposals. Review panels are starting to look at those more closely. Annual reports from awards are starting to be reviewed by program directors like myself, even more with more scrutiny. So everyone needs to step up their games as it relates to this issue of broadening participation. So in that context of connecting with social scientists, NSF in the geosciences has a program called GOLDEN, and it stands for, the acronym stands for Geoscience Opportunities for Leadership Development, or Leadership and Diversity, I should say. And the EN is expanding the network. And this program came about from an ideas lab that NSF supported, and we brought together Earth system science practitioners, the researchers, the scientists, and we brought in social scientists for a week, and we had them in a room with the in a hotel with the facilitator and everything, and it was a rough week, especially the first couple of days, because everyone had their ideas about how science should be conducted and what should be done in this issue, around this issue of diversity and in the geosciences. But by the end of the week, what came out are 5 unique pilot programs that then expanded into last year 30-something awards, I think, and this past year of 21, I think maybe 20 plus or so awards. So our network of individuals who are intentional about not just the individuals that are intentional, but also approaches that are intentional about expanding, revamping, rethinking science environments so that individuals can thrive in those environments and bring all of their innovation and all of their creativity and all of their perspectives and the elements that I spoke about earlier in the talk. So as I mentioned in last year, we made our first set of awards for the Golden program, which is the expansion from the Gold program. And in the Golden program, we funded some supplements for existing awards. We funded some research coordination networks. We funded some workshops and conferences, but we also funded EAGER awards. If you're not aware of EAGER awards are 2-year awards up to $300,000 that NSF can, depending on the program, provide support for. And these EAGER projects are the kind of cutting edge, innovative projects that don't really fit directly in a program. They're just right out there from the traditional disciplines that may be supported at NSF. And so we supported 9 of those last year. And you see across the top of the table the different elements that the different projects are focusing on, and some are focusing on several elements. But I do want to highlight this issue of broadening participation and inclusion and retention in academic structures. So number one, we have several of these EAGERs are looking at mentorship, and not just mentorship for undergraduates and graduates, but peer or co-mentorship in that with that the power dynamic structure of early career faculty and senior faculty, or chairs and deans and faculty, et cetera. And what does that look like, and how is holistic mentoring applied, and where can it be applied if it's not being applied to really support individuals and retain them in the sciences. And we're also looking at, we've supported 2 projects that look at institutional policies related to workload distribution, valuation of diversity activities, education activities, outreach activities as currency for tenure and promotion. I don't have to tell you all at USF and other institutions that the traditional currency for tenure and promotion is what? Grant dollars, publications, etc., right? And so many individuals that are involved, who want to be involved and still as a labor of love because they're intentional, are involved in the education, outreach, diversity initiatives. They don't get credit for that, even though that's what they want to do, and it's very important. And it's something that NSF counts because it falls under broader impacts, which is one of the 2 main criterion. So now there's this disconnect in what's being valued from funding agencies, in particular NSF, what's being valued in the community, but really what's being valued in academia as far as tenure and promotion. So we're really interested to see what comes out of these two projects looking at institutional policies. And may I say also, COVID has certainly, the pandemic has certainly exposed the inequities, certainly with gender, women scientists, and the impact of the pandemic on them, their careers, their tenure and promotion clocks, etc. Not to mention faculty of color, students of color being impacted by the pandemic, not having broadband connections when everyone had to go virtual, you know, all these kinds of things, okay? We had another set of eagers that we supported just this past summer, and these are the themes that those eagers are researching. And so again, professional development, every single one of them is looking at what are the professional development elements for faculty or individuals in the research enterprise that are already established that they can consume or can be used for training for leadership development to help those individuals be champions for inclusion and diversity and equity and all the parts of the Be a Jedi acronym that we saw earlier. So we come back to Charles and you know, kind of winding down, we see this quote here. Hence, after some temporary desire or passion has mastered his human social instincts, humans reflect and compare the now weakened impression of such past impulses with the ever-present social instincts. And then humans feel that sense of dissatisfaction, which all unsatisfied instincts leave behind them. Humans therefore resolve to act differently for the future. And this is conscience. So I guess my question would be, are we operating with a clear conscience in our science? Are we operating ethically? Are we really being objective scientists as we're taught to be objective, holistically objective, or just objective so that we can be statistically confident that our data says what it says it says? You know, maybe we want to step back and kind of look at the entire enterprise. So I'll leave you with, here's some considerations for broadening participation. I'm going to get to the discussion. And this is besides mentoring. We know mentoring is very key, very critical. And a lot of discussion about allyship certainly sprung up last year within natural and physical science disciplines, although social scientists have been talking about allyship for some time. Framing, asset versus deficit framing, okay? Notice I have not used the word minority. We're moving past that kind of framing, even when it just comes down to terminology, because minority only fits within the context of science in the United States. I wouldn't use that term if I went to, say, Ghana. That doesn't fit. So if we're talking about the global research enterprise, that doesn't make sense to use that terminology. And it also puts the onus on the individual, that one fish, instead of the environment. And so what we have to think about how we're framing, even in our discussions, the people that we're talking about, the people we want to recruit, the people we want to retain, the programs that we develop. Is it an underrepresented program, or is it for underrepresented individuals? Well, what does underrepresented mean? And we have to go through all the statistics. Or can we say a program for individuals that have been marginalized or have been minoritized? That means a system has done something to a group of people, and it's not the group of people's fault, so to speak. Now, we may get into a lot of philosophy here, but this is important when we're talking about other cultures that we want to engage and keep in the sciences. Critical self-reflection by white colleagues and administrators. There's all kinds of scholarship out there, and this is where, yeah, conversations can get real uncomfortable, but it's not a thing of blame. It's not a thing of pointing fingers. It's just a thing of recognition that no one asked to be born. So no one really should be treated any differently than anyone else. But if we never really stepped back and thought about that, and how systems have been developed that don't make sense because they're keeping people out because of characteristics that they had nothing to do with, what is that about? Now we have to kind of grasp that and sit with it for a little while and think about it. We also have to recognize, as I mentioned earlier, that bias impacts hiring, awards, appointments, tenure, and promotion. It impacts review panels. It may even impact how program directors make funding recommendations to the grants office here at NSF. So all of us have a lot of work to do in recognizing our bias and just making sure that it's not impacting the decisions we're making. We're not asking anyone to change who they are. Just recognize that you may not be operating the way we all could operate as far as ethically and morally in this education and research enterprise. We need to recognize multiple ways of knowing. For instance, the traditional scientific method deconstructs things down to, you know, the little areas of inquiry, and we study those areas, and then we spend the rest of our careers extrapolating those back up into a larger system. When Western tribal ecological knowledge or West African pedagogies or things of that nature always start with the system first. So if we combine those systems of knowing with the traditional Western scientific method way of knowing, we're going to get a more complete picture. And as I mentioned before, maybe some answers to many of our societal issues may pop up quicker or sooner than if we follow the process we've been following for the last few centuries. Continue the discussions, which is why I appreciate the invitation to have these kind of discussions here at USF, at COMIT, and other places that I've had. I've spoken at NAML, the Association for Marine Laboratories. I spoke at UNOLS last year. We have an ASLO session and Ocean Sciences meeting coming up. I just spoke at SURF last month. So just continue the discussions. And while we're continuing the discussions, we want to make sure that it's okay to just at times not think that we have to have something to say all the time because we're uncomfortable with the silence or we're uncomfortable having to listen to other perspectives. But it's okay just to be quiet and listening. That's part of building relationships and collaboration. So I think with that, I'm going to stop and we can open it up for Q&A, if that makes sense.
Surely does. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Really excellent items to talk about. And I think thanks also for leaving enough time for discussion. Usually we get death by PowerPoint here and we don't leave enough time to interact. And no, it's not enough just to listen here. We need some questions for Dr. Jones. So I'd like to lead it off with questions from the students, if we could, and see if we can elicit some conversation there. I see some of our faculty are not shy about, just listening. So the students, obviously some compelling things mentioned by Dr. Jones here. Anybody willing to venture out of their comfort zone and ask a good question? All right. Well, I tell you what, why don't we let the students ponder this, and we'll get into it a little bit with our faculty here. I saw Pam Mueller's hand up. Pam?
Sorry about the delay. I wanted to unmute my. My question, your initial graph was interesting in the context that it would have been interesting to have that same graph with only the minority individuals plotted, so that we could, because it looked to me like there was a slight increase in towards the present that was masked by the the larger overall trend. That is just a side point. My major question is, has anyone looked at the socioeconomic aspects of individuals and who's pursuing higher degrees? I've worked with several African-American undergrads over the past several years, and hang on, I'm sorry.
That's all right. We're in virtual world. Everyone gets to see everyone's life now.
Sorry.
No problem.
The issue is, well, for example, my first PhD was a white sharecropper son. The sharecropper lost his land and became a custodian at Clemson, and the person that got a PhD with me was the first in his family ever to finish high school, let alone go on and get a PhD. And he spent his career as an educator, but at the community college, state college level, which is looked down upon. And at the same time, my first couple of African American or Black, actually, because some were Caribbean, PhDs were from, one's parent was a doctor, and so I've always wondered. I mean, it's not it. So many of our and I started to say I've mentored some Black undergraduate students, and their focus was on, they got the bachelor's degree, they needed to get out and get a job and help their family and help their younger siblings, and so those are issues that I've seen over the years, that the socioeconomic aspects, and that's really dividing us at all levels. And I'll shut up there.
No, you bring up that, Pamela, you bring up an excellent point. And so that is the socioeconomic piece is one barrier in the system that can be a choke point for entry, for retention, et cetera, in the sciences. You're exactly right. We could look at the investment in sciences in certain school districts. That's one area. So if we're talking about ocean sciences or atmospheric sciences, well-resourced or well-invested school districts may have that programming or that teacher training or the allowance of that connection for teachers to maybe have summer experiences with the researchers like you, and then take that back to the classroom. But the resources are not equitably distributed across the United States for other systemic reasons. And so students who have, no choice in the matter happen to be at institutions or schools that, aren't well resourced. And so their exposure then to teachers with that experience, or even just their exposure to earth system science content, is going to be limited. So by the time they get to USF as an undergrad, what they've been told culturally is you need to get a degree to get a good job to then, and they have not had the luxury of just exploring like well-resourced individuals or individuals from well-resourced systems. That's just one aspect, because that's the K through 12 system. If we're talking about geosciences, is expensive. These are expensive disciplines. If we're earth science, you have to buy a rock hammer and climbing equipment and tents and boots and all that kind of stuff. If you're going to Antarctica, you work all. So there's all of those things. So you bring up an excellent point, and so it's not. I think I'll wrap up by saying because there are so many issues in the system that are barriers, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. There's no magic bullet. There has to be a systemic approach as much as we can through all of these areas to look at where are the choke points, where are the gates, who are the gatekeepers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why we need as many colleagues and as many brains looking at this issue as we can. Because just narrowly looking at one thing, you may get some insight, but we're going to miss the bigger picture. That's an excellent point you brought up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. Ben Ross is on the line. Ben, you got a question?
Hi, yeah, I do. Thanks. First off, Dr. Jones, thanks very much for the presentation. Sorry, I'll remove my, there we go. So I've been applying for faculty jobs recently, and I'm currently doing a postdoc at FAMU in the NOAA Center for Coastal and Marine Ecosystems, which has a really big focus on recruitment and retention. And I guess I feel like I'm learning a lot about how people do recruitment, but it often involves targeting, as a professor, who are you targeting? You're targeting students who are already either in undergrad or possibly, getting ready for graduate school. And I feel like, I guess what I'm asking is how, as a faculty member, could I be looking to recruit people and kind of get by the sort of self-selection bias, because by the time they're at the point where they're even coming to my notice, they've already had to have gone and made a choice to be interested in the geosciences. And it feels like, one of the big issues is that a lot of, the kind of folks who want to get in don't even see that as a viable job opportunity before they get to the point where I will even meet them. So I guess I was just do you have any thoughts on that? Thanks very much.
Yeah, great question. I just dropped in the chat a link to our GeoPaths program, and that program is designed to address mainly the issue that you're bringing up. And this program is 6-7 years old now, and there are all kinds of projects that we've supported that have come up with really innovative ways to address the issue that you brought up about recruitment and where to recruit, how to recruit, not perpetuate the self-selection model, as you just mentioned, and so that we're opening doors and channels, or we'll say in the tributaries and the braided river concept, for individuals to come in, but also allow those points for them, if they need to transition out, but leave the door open so they can come back in. All of these kinds of things have to be considered. And so I would, as early career professional like yourself, I would encourage you maybe to sign up to be a reviewer for programs like GeoPaths at NSF. That way you can, not only you're going to learn how to write great proposals, but you're going to see the cutting edge research that's coming by. You're going to learn from other colleagues how to review proposals and what NSF is paying attention to regarding worthy proposals for recommendation. So I'd encourage you, if you have time, and with the virtual world now, you don't even have to travel for 2 or 3 days. We can connect you virtually for review panels, and you can still get that same great experience. But also take a look at the GeoPath solicitation. There will be a revised one coming out by the end of the year. And think about maybe to that program for recruitment and into the geosciences with some research experiences and go from there. So yeah, great question. Trauma-informed programming, trauma-informed mentoring has become a real issue. Well, it's always been a real issue for certain groups of people, but the pandemic, I'll go back to that again, has exposed so many of those points and needs for treating people like human beings. You know, so are we shaping the upcoming generation as a matter of fact, I wrote a quote down, so I need to find it. Okay, here we go. Are we focusing on scientists who are people or people who desire to be scientists? So in other words, are we pushing the science out there so much, and this is what a scientist looks like, and that great documentary from a year and a half ago, please go watch that, about women scientists. Certainly Jane Wellenbring's experience in the Antarctic, and we know, some of us know about that. But are we so focused on the science that we forgot about humans? And this goes all the way back to the title of my talk. Science doesn't conduct itself. It doesn't. Humans, it's a human enterprise. It's a social enterprise. And to have that kind of impact on an early career faculty member like Nancy and others who I've mentored at different levels, undergraduate, graduate, postdoc, et cetera, that's a real thing. That it's real, and we have to recognize what are we perpetuating in the system that is causing that trauma. The system has been designed from the start as exclusionary. And that's not, again, that's not pointing fingers to one group or another, but it's the notion of your freshman year in college, when you're sitting in the freshman seminar and the professor says, look to your left, look to your right, one of you is not going to be, you know, that kind of thing. Or the 101 science courses specifically designed to weed out people.
Yeah.
That's where we are. But Nancy, you back?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for giving me a second there.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I am not optimistic that we are going to change academia very quickly if we are leaving it to the people with the power at this point to make the changes. And so I guess what I'm excited to see that NSF is taking the lead and funding these proposals to try to figure out how to really make some change. And I hope that NSF will use its power to, you know, perhaps make some radical, you know, lines in the sand for like, okay, we're not going to give you proposals unless you change this about your tenure and promotion structure, or change this about how you mentor students and faculty, you know, because I just don't see that happening from within academia. So, and I also have noticed that peer pressure works. So if Scripps does something, then you know, we're much more likely to do it. And so those are just my that's just my comments, but thank you.
Yeah, great point. That's why we have to walk together. See, I know we're at time. Federal agencies, academia, professional societies, private sector, this is a collaborative effort. And we all have our roles to play, and we all have to do this together and be intentional about it.
So, we have 3 more hands, and I'd really like to extend a little bit so we can get some of these answers on the table. I think it would be great. Dave Nark, and then Bob, and then Sarah.
And are you okay on time, Dr. Jones? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, I have about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Gosh,
Sorry about the delay. I was trying to get my microphone to turn on properly. I really enjoyed your seminar, and I noticed in the beginning that you had an experience or experiences as a high school teacher in your career. And I think it raises a question for me is, what is NSF trying to do now to help fix the K through 12 pipeline in preparing students for STEM? I mean, many of us look to international students to have the skill sets needed to do certain types of work in math and science. And as your experience as a high school teacher, I'm just curious what your thoughts were on how to address that STEM pipeline.
David, that's a huge question. NSF does have an Education and Human Resources Directorate, but because NSF is a research agency, the EHR Directorate supports work that looks at the research on education. So there are programs that focus on research in informal settings and, at the undergraduate level, graduate level, some K through 12, citizen science, public participatory science, etc. We also have a racial equity program. We have an ethics program in our social and behavioral economic sciences directorate. But unfortunately, the way the federal structures are set up, the Department of Education is the place where the K through 12 resources and energies are, and that agency is huge, and it is steeped in hierarchy. I'm not belittling the agency; it's just what it is. It's steeped in hierarchy, and it's very highly political, and so to rely solely on an agency to kind of steer, I don't know. Things are going to have to happen at the local levels, where individuals like yourself or Nancy or Ben or whoever can connect with teachers locally, two-year college faculty who are adjuncts locally, design projects that are novel, that can bring in, work with aquarium or learning centers or Disney, whatever, on novel ways to get Earth system science content to students outside of the classroom, because really they're going to learn more doing outside of the classroom than, and I dare say this, the institution of education. I could speak as again, 5-year high school teacher. It's an institution. It's not about learning. I'll just put that out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, so.
Sarah, I'm going to leave the last question for you.
Awesome, thank you. So my question actually really builds off of what David just asked, and as well as what Ben had asked earlier, just about, I'm curious, maybe not quite with your NSF hat on, what role you do see in formal science education. I think what the kind of mantra that I've heard is if you can't grab a kid's attention by like 6th grade, or if you can't hook them by 6th grade, that pipeline, they may never make it back in. So I guess, it's a pretty open-ended question, and you don't have that much time, and we could probably talk all day about it. But I guess I'm just curious where you see informal science education in terms of trying to increase the underrepresented people in science in the U.S.
It is one of the keys, and it's not just for those who have been historically underrepresented in science, for everyone. Because you could just see in society the lack of science literacy among the general public as it pertains to vaccines, as it pertains to climate change. There's just a general lack of science understanding, and that starts back to I'm on my soapbox now about the institution of education. The K through 12 system, for the most part, generally speaking, the way science is presented, it's not relational to the real world. And so to have informal programs certainly helps with students and citizens, adults, to round out their understanding, to get that experiential, to use the other part of their brain so that concepts can begin to be integrated into, oh, that's what it means when such and such happens. Because they're seeing it, they're involved in it, and learning centers and aquaria, museums and libraries, and those places are great places if they have education components, and maybe you want to introduce that to them if they don't. And NSF may be able to support the initiation of that kind of program at an informal center. But to balance out that learning, not education, but the learning, so that we have a stronger literate public, and certainly a science literate public.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jones, for a really thought-provoking presentation. Great and very timely in terms of the consideration of all these ideas. And thanks for the heads up about broader impacts. I guess we'll have to retool a little bit. Really appreciate it. Please turn on your mics and your microphones, and let's give Dr. Jones a big hand. Thanks again, and I hope you could join us at some other time.
I'll be happy to. Looking forward to the invitation, and thanks so much.
Thank you. Great.
All right. See you all.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Sarah Grassi.